You think soul food is just what restaurants serve today? The real dishes, the ones that sustained generations through hardship and celebration, have quietly vanished from our tables. Black kitchens once held recipes so powerful they could heal, comfort, and unite. Here are 60 forgotten soul food recipes that time nearly erased. Miniature cornbread muffins with honey butter were golden gems that children popped into their mouths whole, the crumbly cornbread texture melting while sweet honey butter added richness. Mothers would prepare cornbread batter using stone-ground cornmeal, flour, eggs, buttermilk, and just enough sugar to balance the corn's natural earthiness, then spoon it into mini muffin tins that baked quickly. The muffins emerged from ovens with crispy, slightly caramelized tops and tender, crumbly interiors that begged to be broken open and slathered with butter. Honey butter was made by whipping softened butter with honey until fluffy and smooth, creating a spread that melted instantly when slathered on hot muffins. In the 1970s, Black households, these miniature cornbread muffins represented Southern hospitality in bite-sized form. Children loved them because they were individually portioned, making them feel like special treats rather than ordinary bread, and the sweet honey butter made every bite feel indulgent and special. Brandied cranberry orange relish was the condiment that made store-bought cranberry sauce look like a joke. Black mothers made this weeks in advance with fresh cranberries that popped and burst as they cooked with sugar, orange juice, and zest. The secret was cooking them just until they broke down but still had texture, never letting them turn to mush. Once cooled, the relish was spiked with good brandy, enough to taste clearly but not be boozy, plus crystallized ginger chopped fine for heat. Some families added chopped pecans, others used golden raisins plumped in the brandy first. The relish was stored in glass jars where the alcohol preserved it and flavors melded into something more complex. By Christmas, it had transformed, sweet, tangy, warm, with brandy depth that paired perfectly with turkey and ham. Mothers guarded the brandy ratio and crystallized ginger addition because these made their relish memorable. Guests asked for the recipe every year, and every year mothers said it was just cranberries. Chitterlings, known lovingly as chitlins, were not for the faint of heart, but for those who knew the value of patience and pride. These were the cleaned and boiled intestines of the hog, cooked down for hours until tender and fragrant. What some saw as scraps, others turned into delicacy, a meal shared on holidays to honor endurance itself. Preparing chitlins was an act of devotion, from the endless washing to the slow simmer with onions, vinegar, and spice. They filled homes with a smell that spoke of both hardship and heritage, a reminder that survival had its own flavor. Served with hot sauce and cornbread, they were more than food. They were history in a pot. On Christmas tables across the South, chitlins weren't just eaten, they were respected, a symbol of making beauty from what others cast aside. Peanut brittle with cayenne was the Christmas candy that had unexpected heat. Black mothers made this by cooking sugar and corn syrup to hard crack stage, then stirring in roasted peanuts, butter, vanilla, and the secret addition, cayenne pepper that added warmth without obvious spiciness. Baking soda was stirred in at the last second, making the candy puff slightly and creating proper texture. The mixture was poured onto buttered sheet pans, spread thin, and left to cool completely. Once hard, it was broken into irregular shards that snapped cleanly. The cayenne made people's mouths warm as they ate, the heat building slowly and making them reach for more. This brittle was packed into tins and given as gifts, its unexpected kick making it memorable. The cayenne addition stayed secret because most people couldn't identify what made this brittle different, only that it was more interesting than any they'd tasted before. Cheese wafers made with sharp cheddar and butter created crispy, salty crackers that children munched by the handful, their homemade quality far superior to anything store-bought could offer. Grandmothers would cream softened butter with finely shredded sharp cheddar cheese, then gradually add flour, salt, and cayenne pepper until the mixture formed a stiff dough. The dough was rolled into logs, wrapped in wax paper, and chilled until firm, then sliced into thin rounds and baked until golden brown and crispy. As they baked, the cheese melted into the butter and flour, creating crackers that were rich, savory, and addictively crunchy with just a hint of heat from the cayenne. In 1970s, Black households, cheese wafers represented Southern tradition and hospitality, recipes that had been passed down through generations. Children loved cheese wafers because they tasted like cheesy potato chips but felt more sophisticated since they were homemade.
Fried chitterlings were the bold expressions of soul food tradition, transforming pig intestines into something crispy and surprisingly delicious. After hours of cleaning and boiling, the chitterlings were cut into pieces, seasoned, dredged in flour, and fried until the exterior turned golden and crunchy. The texture inside was tender and chewy, carrying a distinctive flavor that divided opinions sharply. Families who served fried chitterlings did so with pride. Understanding this dish connected them to ancestors who transformed scraps into sustenance. Holiday gatherings featured chitterlings alongside familiar dishes, offering tradition for those who remembered and curiosity for younger generations. The cooking process filled homes with an unmistakable aroma announcing celebration.
Ambrosia salad with fresh coconut was the Christmas side dish that straddled dessert and salad. Black mothers made this using fresh fruit, mandarin oranges, pineapple chunks, maraschino cherries, and the secret addition of pomegranate seeds that added jewel-tone color and tart brightness. The binding agent wasn't just whipped cream, but a mixture of whipped cream, sour cream, and cream cheese that gave it tanginess. Fresh coconut was grated and toasted lightly, adding nutty depth that sweetened flaked coconut couldn't match. Mini marshmallows were folded in at the last minute so they stayed soft. The salad was refrigerated for several hours, letting flavors meld while the coconut softened. It was served in crystal bowls at Christmas dinner, looking almost too pretty to eat with pink and white and red colors. The pomegranate addition and the cream cheese mixture stayed secret because these elevated ambrosia from church potluck standard to something genuinely special. Wild muscadine grape jam brought the late summer woods to the breakfast table in a deep purple shine. Children and parents walked along fence lines and wooded edges with baskets in hand, searching for the thick-skinned grapes that thrived in southern heat. Once gathered, the fruit was boiled gently until the skins burst and the pulp softened, filling kitchens with a fragrance that hinted at honey and earth. The juice was strained and mixed with sugar, then cooked again until it thickened into a jam rich enough to spread over biscuits or stir into morning porridge. Families prized each jar, knowing that muscadines grew wild and free, needing only careful hands and patience to become something sweet. In some towns, church groups organized picking days, turning the harvest into a social event where songs and laughter echoed through the vines. Today, supermarket grapes have replaced the wild hunt, and store-bought jams lack the musky depth of fruit ripened under southern sun. But memories of purple-stained fingers still linger in many hearts. Cheese ball rolled in pecans sat proudly on serving platters surrounded by crackers, its cream cheese base mixed with cheddar, green onions, and seasonings before being shaped into a perfect sphere and coated with chopped pecans. Aunties would soften cream cheese and mix it with shredded sharp cheddar, finely chopped green onions, Worcestershire sauce, garlic powder, and sometimes hot sauce for complexity. The mixture was then shaped into a ball or log, wrapped in plastic, and chilled until firm enough to handle. Just before serving, the cheese ball was rolled in finely chopped pecans that created a crunchy, nutty coating contrasting beautifully with the creamy interior. In 1970s Black households, cheese balls represented sophistication and effort, centerpieces of appetizer spreads that showed guests the host had put thought into the gathering. Children loved them because they could spread the cheese themselves onto crackers, feeling grown up and independent.
Fried rabbit pieces were country cooking at its finest, turning wild game or backyard hutch rabbits into crispy, tender meals rivaling any fried chicken. The rabbit was jointed, soaked in buttermilk to tenderize the lean meat, then dredged in seasoned flour and fried until golden brown with a crust that crackled with every bite. The meat inside stayed moist and mild, taking on seasoning flavors while maintaining delicate texture, distinguishing it from poultry. Rural families raised rabbits for frying because they reproduced quickly and required little space or feed. Children learned to help with preparation, understanding where food came from and respecting animals that sustained them. Fried rabbit was often served at special gatherings, considered more refined than everyday fare. It represented self-sufficiency.
Asparagus wrapped in ham created elegant finger food that introduced children to vegetables they might not try otherwise, the salty ham making the asparagus taste less intimidating. Mothers would blanch fresh asparagus spears briefly in boiling water until they turned bright green and became slightly tender, then plunge them into ice water. Each asparagus spear was then wrapped with a thin slice of deli ham, sometimes spread with cream cheese or mustard first for extra flavor. The wrapped spears were arranged on serving platters, sometimes secured with toothpicks if the ham wouldn't stay wrapped. In Black households during the 1970s, asparagus wrapped in ham represented sophistication borrowed from magazine recipes, appetizers that looked impressive enough for special occasions. Children loved them because the ham provided familiar salty flavor, while the asparagus added crunch and color, making vegetables feel like treats rather than obligations. Peppermint bark with dark chocolate was the Christmas candy that Black mothers made for gift-giving. Dark chocolate was melted carefully, tempered properly so it set with proper snap. The secret was adding a pinch of sea salt to the chocolate before spreading it thin on parchment. Once the dark chocolate set, white chocolate was melted and spread over top, then immediately sprinkled with crushed peppermint candy. The bark was chilled until firm, then broken into irregular pieces that looked rustic and beautiful. The salt in the dark chocolate balanced the sweetness and made the peppermint taste brighter. This candy was packed into tins lined with wax paper, given to neighbors, teachers, and co-workers. Making it required patience. Chocolate had to be the right temperature. Peppermint had to be crushed fine enough. Timing had to be perfect. The salt addition stayed secret because it was subtle but essential to preventing the bark from being cloying. Cabbage and smoked sausage stew was what happened when wisdom met hunger and turned necessity into nourishment. In many kitchens, just one link of sausage was enough to flavor an entire pot, its smoky saltiness seeping deep into the tender folds of cabbage and the soft cubes of potato below. Everything simmered slowly on the stove through the afternoon, filling the home with a smell that felt like safety itself. For Christmas, this humble stew took on special meaning, a dish that stretched small portions into abundance, gathering families around steaming bowls and simple gratitude. The broth was rich without being heavy, each bite balanced between spice and sweetness, softness and strength. No one left hungry, no matter how modest the table. The stew reminded everyone that good food was not about excess, but about intention, about patience and care. Every spoonful carried the echo of firewood crackling, hands stirring, and voices laughing nearby. Cabbage and smoked sausage stew was proof that celebration does not come from wealth, but from the warmth that fills a kitchen when people share what they have. Fruitcake soaked in rum was the Christmas tradition that separated good fruitcake from the jokes everyone made about bad fruitcake. Black mothers started this cake in November, giving it time to age properly. The cake was dense with candied fruit, cherries, pineapple, citrus peel, and chopped pecans, bound together with spiced batter. The secret was soaking the fruit in rum for a week before baking, letting it plump and absorb alcohol. After baking, the cake was wrapped in rum-soaked cheesecloth, then wrapped again in foil and stored in a tin. Every week until Christmas, the cloth was unwrapped and more rum was brushed over the cake, building flavor and moisture. By Christmas, the cake was dark, dense, and intensely flavored, nothing like the dry, tasteless versions people complained about. It was sliced thin and served with coffee, a little piece going a long way. The weekly rum basting stayed secret because it required patience and attention that most people wouldn't commit to. Green tomato slices served with remoulade sauce were crispy, tangy bites that introduced children to Southern traditions. the cornmeal coating providing crunch while the tart tomato inside stayed firm and flavorful. Mothers would slice green tomatoes thick, dredge them in seasoned cornmeal mixed with flour and spices, then fry them in hot oil until golden brown and crispy. The remoulade sauce was made from mayonnaise, mustard, pickles, capers, and spices, creating a tangy, creamy dip that complemented the fried tomatoes perfectly. Each slice was served hot with a small dish of sauce for dipping, the combination of temperatures and textures making every bite interesting. In 1970s, Black households, fried green tomatoes represented end-of-season resourcefulness, using tomatoes that wouldn't ripen before frost to create something delicious. Children loved fried green tomatoes because they were crispy like French fries but tasted tangy and different, expanding their understanding of what vegetables could be.
Fried cornmeal mush was breakfast magic that transformed yesterday's leftovers into something crispy and golden for the morning table. Families poured leftover mush into pans, let it set overnight until firm, then sliced it thick and fried each piece in bacon grease until the exterior turned crunchy, while inside stayed soft and creamy. The edges caramelized, adding sweetness that complemented drizzles of molasses or sorghum syrup. This dish wasted nothing, turning what might be discarded into hearty breakfast that filled bellies before school or work. Children loved the contrast between shatteringly crisp crust and smooth interior, eating slice after slice. The smell of frying cornmeal filled kitchens with warmth on cold mornings.
Chicken salad stuffed in cherry tomatoes created colorful bite-sized portions that children eagerly grabbed. The cool, creamy chicken salad contrasting with the fresh, slightly tart tomato cups that held everything together. Aunties would hollow out cherry tomatoes using small spoons or melon ballers, creating little edible bowls that were functional and beautiful when arranged on serving platters. The chicken salad was made from finely chopped cooked chicken mixed with mayonnaise, diced celery, sweet pickle relish, and seasonings. The mixture kept cold until serving time. Each hollowed tomato was filled with a generous spoonful of chicken salad, mounded slightly on top for visual appeal. In 1970s Black households, these stuffed tomatoes represented creativity and presentation, transforming simple ingredients into appetizers that looked impressive enough for special occasions. Children loved them because they were perfectly portioned, colorful, and combined familiar flavors in a fun format. Buttermilk cornbread with honey butter was Christmas dinner's supporting player that often stole the show. Black mothers made this in cast-iron skillets heated with bacon grease until smoking hot, creating a crust that shattered when you bit it. The cornbread was made with white cornmeal, buttermilk, eggs, and just enough flour to give it structure. The secret was adding creamed corn to the batter, which kept the cornbread moist for days. It baked until deep golden brown, almost burned at the edges, the center tender but not gummy. The honey butter was softened, butter whipped with honey until fluffy, but the ratio mattered. The cornbread was served hot, split open, and smeared with honey butter that melted into every crumb. This cornbread appeared at Christmas dinner to soak up potlikker from greens, gravy from dressing, and juices from ham. The creamed corn addition stayed secret because it was simple but effective. Collard greens with ham hocks were the soul of Christmas cooking long before anyone called it soul food. A pot of greens simmered all day on the stove, the smoky meat from leftover ham bones slowly melting into the broth. Each leaf softened into silk, soaking up the flavor of salt, smoke, and thyme. The rich scent wrapped itself around the house, promising something steady and strong. Collards were more than food. They were ritual. On Christmas Day, they stood for good fortune, health, and survival. Every family had their own way, a pinch of pepper here, a spoon of vinegar there, each pot telling a story passed down in taste, not words. When served with cornbread to soak up the potlikker, the meal became a full blessing. Collard greens and ham hocks fed more than hunger. They fed heritage. Churned milk soup was what you made when you had finished making butter and still needed a meal. That leftover buttermilk became the base for a tangy, hearty soup that could feed a family from a single pot. It was mixed with cornmeal, herbs, and whatever vegetables were on hand, then simmered until it thickened like velvet. The smell was sharp but cozy, filling the kitchen with warmth and familiarity. Some families dropped bits of bread into the bowl, letting it soak up the flavor. It was simple food, born from old farm routines and frugal wisdom. Churn milk soup taught that nothing should ever be wasted, not even the scraps of a good day's work. It soothed hunger and reminded everyone that comfort could come from the most ordinary things. With each spoonful, it carried the echo of laughter and work from generations before. Chicken liver pâté spread on crackers created rich, smooth bites that adventurous children tried, the creamy texture and distinctive flavor introducing them to foods that felt grown-up and sophisticated. Aunties would sauté chicken livers with onions and butter until cooked through but still slightly pink inside, then blend them with cream cheese, spices, and sometimes brandy or sherry until smooth. The pâté was chilled in molds or ramekins, then unmolded onto serving platters surrounded by crackers and garnished with chopped parsley or capers. The texture was silky smooth, while the flavor was rich and slightly metallic in that characteristic liver way that some loved and others found challenging. In Black households during the 1970s, chicken liver pâté represented culinary sophistication, recipes borrowed from French cuisine and adapted to Southern ingredients. Children who tried it felt brave and grown up, stepping outside their comfort zones to taste foods their parents enjoyed at special gatherings.
Fried hush puppies were essential companions to every fish fry, golden cornmeal balls emerging from the same oil as the fish they accompanied. The batter was simple, combining cornmeal, flour, egg, buttermilk, and finely chopped onion, then dropped by spoonfuls into hot oil where they puffed and browned into irregular spheres. The exterior turned crispy, while the interior stayed soft and slightly sweet, the onion adding subtle depth that distinguished them from plain cornbread. Legend said they got their name from cooks tossing them to barking dogs with the command to hush, though families cared more about eating them than debating origins. Hush puppies were served hot, piled on platters alongside fried fish, passed around until they disappeared. They were never fancy, but they were always essential.
Pigs in blankets made with cocktail franks wrapped in crescent roll dough emerged from ovens as perfect little packages that children ate by the handful, their small size making them perfect for young appetites and hands that grabbed multiple pieces at once. Mothers would unroll refrigerated crescent dough, separating it along the perforations before cutting each triangle in half to create smaller pieces that wrapped around cocktail-sized hot dogs snugly. The wrapped franks were arranged on baking sheets with the dough seam facing down, sometimes brushed with melted butter or beaten egg for extra golden color. As they baked, the dough puffed up and turned flaky and golden, while the franks inside steamed and stayed juicy, creating combinations of textures that made every bite satisfying. In the 1970s, Black households, pigs in blankets represented quick, crowd-pleasing appetizers. Children loved them because they were perfectly sized for little hands. Pecan pie with bourbon and dark chocolate was the Christmas dessert that made store-bought pecan pies taste like cardboard. Black mothers made this with homemade crust, using butter and lard for tenderness and flake. The filling started with dark corn syrup, brown sugar, eggs, and melted butter, but the secrets were bourbon stirred in for depth and dark chocolate chips scattered across the bottom. The bourbon enhanced the pecan's natural flavor without making the pie taste boozy. The chocolate melted during baking, creating pockets of rich darkness. Whole pecan halves were arranged on top in perfect circles, making the pie beautiful. It baked until the center was just set but still had slight wobble, then cooled to room temperature where it firmed perfectly. The combination of bourbon and chocolate elevated pecan pie from ordinary to extraordinary. Mothers guarded these additions because they represented sophistication and the knowledge that traditional recipes could be improved with careful enhancements. Boiled custard was a dessert meant to comfort the spirit as much as the body, a soft and soothing sweetness that wrapped around the senses like a blanket. Made from milk, sugar, and eggs beaten until pale, it was cooked gently on the stove, whisked slow and steady until thick enough to coat a spoon without curdling. If vanilla or nutmeg could be spared, they were stirred in last, their fragrance filling the kitchen like warmth itself. Too rich to drink and too delicate to slice, boiled custard occupied a tender middle ground between milk and pudding, a texture meant to be savored slowly. It was often poured into mugs and sipped by lamplight, steam curling in the air as families sat together after long days. On Christmas nights, it replaced eggnog for those who had no cream to spare, yet it offered the same joy and calm. Every spoonful was peace after hardship, sweetness earned through patience and care. It was the kind of dessert that didn't shout for attention. It whispered comfort, carrying memories of home, of togetherness, and of the quiet grace that makes ordinary things feel sacred. Boiled custard was Christmas distilled into warmth and kindness, proof that gentleness could fill a cup.
Fried peanuts were crunchy snacks that transformed raw legumes into salty golden treats, perfect for gatherings and quiet evenings. Raw peanuts were dropped into hot oil and fried until they turned deep golden and developed satisfying crunch throughout. The flavor was nuttier and richer than roasted versions, with slight sweetness from caramelization that made them irresistible. Families in peanut-growing regions made these during harvest when fresh nuts were abundant. The fried peanuts were salted while hot, crystals clinging to the oily surface. Children gathered around waiting for them to cool, burning fingertips in eagerness. Fried peanuts were simple pleasures that brought people together, shared from bowls, while stories were told and memories made.
Cocktail sausages wrapped in flaky biscuit dough emerged from ovens as golden crescents that children grabbed from cooling racks, burning their fingers but unable to wait. Mothers would roll out refrigerated biscuit dough, cutting it into strips before wrapping each small sausage like a tiny gift and arranging them on greased baking sheets. The wrapped sausages baked until the dough turned golden brown and flaky, the fat from the sausages creating pockets of rich, meaty flavor. Some families brushed the tops with melted butter and sesame seeds before baking, adding extra richness and subtle, nutty crunch. In Black households during the 1970s, these sausage rolls appeared at every major holiday, their ease of preparation making them perfect for busy cooks managing multiple dishes. Children loved them because they were small, portable, and perfectly sized for little hands. Buttermilk Sky biscuits were Christmas morning tradition, tall and fluffy and buttery enough to make store-bought rolls irrelevant. Black mothers made these before sunrise using self-rising flour, buttermilk, and cold butter cut into pea-sized pieces, never melted, because that destroyed flakiness. The secret was handling the dough minimally, folding it exactly 3 times to create layers without developing gluten. Some grandmothers used white lily flour specifically, swearing nothing else produced the same tenderness. The shaped biscuits were placed touching in cast iron skillets, so sides stayed soft while tops and bottoms crisped. Before baking, each was brushed with melted butter mixed with honey, not enough to make them sweet, just enough to create a golden glaze. They baked until risen to twice their height, then were brushed with more honey butter while hot. The recipe stayed secret because perfect biscuits required technique more than ingredients. Sweet potato pie with cornmeal crust was the true heart of the Southern table, baked with love long before store-bought crusts ever appeared. The filling was made from mashed sweet potatoes whipped smooth with sugar, milk, and a hint of nutmeg or cinnamon, then poured into a crust of cornmeal and lard. That crust was golden and gritty, firm enough to hold but tender enough to crumble under a fork. As it baked, the scent of caramelized sweet potatoes and roasted corn filled the house, mingling with the sound of laughter and the hum of family gathering near the stove. This pie was both memory and meal, a creation born from the soil itself, made from 2 humble crops that had carried people through both hard times and harvests. It was a dish that did not need wealth to feel rich. Each slice offered sweetness that came not from sugar, but from care, from skill, and from the pride of feeding others. On Christmas tables, it gleamed like amber in the lamplight, a symbol of home, resilience, and gratitude. Sweet potato pie with cornmeal crust was more than dessert. It was the story of survival turned into something beautiful. Giblet gravy over rice was one of those dinners that showed how nothing went to waste in the kitchen. Chicken was expensive, but the innards, the gizzard, liver, and heart, were cheap or sometimes even given away by butchers. My grandmother chopped them small, simmered them in broth, and thickened the pot into a rich gravy that smelled like Sunday supper. Poured over rice, it became hearty enough to stretch across the whole family. The rice soaked up the flavor, turning a small handful of giblets into a meal that fed 6 mouths without complaint. Some children turned up their noses at first, but hunger taught quick appreciation, and the taste of the gravy was strong, savory, and full of life. She said, "Giblet gravy was proof that dignity came not from the cut of meat, but from the hands that prepared it." In the 1960s, this dish carried people through lean nights, filling bowls with warmth when little else could be afforded. Giblet gravy over rice was frugality turned into something satisfying. Spinach dip, served with crackers and vegetables, was creamy, savory goodness that children scooped up enthusiastically. The rich cream cheese and sour cream base mixed with chopped spinach and seasonings, creating dips that tasted indulgent. Aunties would thaw frozen chopped spinach and squeeze out all the excess water before mixing it with softened cream cheese, sour cream, mayonnaise, dried vegetable soup mix, and sometimes water chestnuts for added crunch. The mixture was stirred together until smooth and well combined, then refrigerated for several hours to allow flavors to meld and develop depth. Some families served the dip cold, while others baked it briefly to create warm, bubbling cheese pulls that made every scoop exciting. In 1970s, Black households, spinach dip represented modern entertaining, recipes that came from package instructions but became beloved traditions. Children loved spinach dip because the vegetables were hidden in creamy richness, making them willing to eat greens.
Fried frog legs were delicacies that appeared on African American tables in communities near swamps, rivers, and bayous throughout the South. The legs were cleaned, soaked in buttermilk, seasoned, dredged in flour, and fried until the coating turned golden, while the tender meat inside stayed moist and mild. The flavor was delicate, often compared to chicken, but lighter, with a sweetness unique to fresh-caught frogs. Families who lived near water caught frogs at night using flashlights and quick hands, turning evening hunts into adventures that ended with morning feasts. The legs were considered special occasion food, served at gatherings where their presence signaled abundance. Children who grew up eating frog legs developed appreciation for flavors others might never experience.
Salmon croquettes, served as mini appetizers, were crispy golden patties that children devoured while standing in kitchens, their hands reaching for more before finishing what they were already eating. Grandmothers would drain cans of pink salmon, carefully picking through the meat to remove bones and skin, then flaking the fish into mixing bowls where it was combined with chopped onions, bell peppers, beaten eggs, cornmeal, and seasonings. The mixture was shaped into small patties, pressed firmly to ensure they held together, then carefully lowered into hot oil where they sizzled and turned golden brown. The exterior developed a crispy crust while the interior stayed moist and flavorful. In 1970s, Black households' salmon croquettes were economical elegance, transforming canned fish into something special worthy of holiday tables. Children loved them because they were handheld, didn't require forks, and packed protein and flavor into every crispy bite. Sweet potato biscuits with cane syrup were Christmas breakfast tradition that turned leftover sweet potatoes into something special. Black mothers mashed roasted sweet potatoes, then mixed them into biscuit dough with buttermilk, butter, and just enough flour to make the dough workable. The secret was adding a tablespoon of honey to the dough, which enhanced the sweet potatoes' natural sweetness. The biscuits were tender and slightly sweet, their orange color making them festive. They were served hot with butter and cane syrup drizzled over top, the syrup's molasses notes complementing the sweet potatoes perfectly. These biscuits appeared on Christmas morning alongside eggs, sausage, and grits, their sweetness balancing savory breakfast foods. Children especially loved them because they tasted almost like dessert. The honey edition stayed secret because it was the difference between good sweet potato biscuits and extraordinary ones. Sweet rice pudding with raisins was Christmas comfort at its most gentle, a dessert born from thrift and turned into grace. Leftover rice was simmered again in milk until creamy, with sugar, butter, and cinnamon stirred in to bring it to life. Plump raisins softened in the heat, releasing their sweetness into the mixture, while the scent of nutmeg or vanilla filled the air. The pudding thickened slowly, stirred by careful hands that had learned to measure not with cups, but with instinct. Served warm in simple bowls, it was dessert that asked for quiet, for gratitude, for the slow savoring of every spoonful. It tasted of simplicity, of love that didn't shout but lingered softly. For children, it was a treat. For elders, a memory. Sweet rice pudding was more than a way to use what was left. It was proof that comfort could come from the smallest acts of care. In every creamy bite lived peace, patience, and home. Green tomato mincemeat was the Christmas preserve that used end-of-season tomatoes before frost killed them. Black mothers chopped green tomatoes, apples, raisins, and sweat, then cooked everything with sugar, spices, vinegar, and the secret addition of molasses that added depth. The mixture simmered for hours until thick and dark, developing complex flavors that improved with age. The secret spice blend included cinnamon, cloves, allspice, nutmeg, and a pinch of black pepper. The mincemeat was canned in jars and stored until Christmas, when it was used for pies, tarts, and cookies. The green tomatoes provided pectin that helped the mincemeat set while adding tang that balanced the sweetness. This preserve represented resourcefulness, using what the garden gave before winter came. The molasses and black pepper additions stayed secret because they created complexity that most people assumed came from expensive brandy. Smoked oysters on crackers with hot sauce were adventurous bites that curious children tried. The smoky, briny oysters creating complex flavors that divided people into lovers and haters with no middle ground. Fathers would open tins of smoked oysters packed in oil, arranging them on serving platters surrounded by crackers and providing small bottles of hot sauce for those who wanted extra heat. The oysters had a strong, distinctive flavor, smoky from the curing process and intensely oceanic. Each oyster was placed on a cracker, sometimes with a tiny drop of hot sauce, creating bite-sized portions that delivered maximum flavor. In 1970s, Black household smoked oysters represented coastal sophistication and culinary bravery, appetizers that showed guests the host was willing to serve bold, distinctive foods. Children who tried smoked oysters either loved them immediately or swore them off forever, the strong flavor creating lasting memories.
Fried chicken feet were testament to the soul food commitment that nothing from the bird should ever go to waste. The feet were cleaned meticulously, boiled until tender, then seasoned and fried until skin turned crispy while the interior stayed gelatinous. The texture was unique, combining crunch with silkiness, requiring adventurous eaters willing to gnaw around small bones. Families who raised chickens saved the feet specifically for frying, understanding their value when others might discard them. The collagen-rich feet were considered nourishing, good for joints according to kitchen wisdom passed through generations. Children who grew up eating chicken feet developed appreciation for textures others found challenging. Fried chicken feet carried cultural pride and connection to ancestors.
Cinnamon-spiked red velvet cake was Christmas tradition that separated real bakers from box mix pretenders. Black mothers made this from scratch using cocoa powder, buttermilk, and red food coloring. But the secret was ground cinnamon stirred into the batter, just enough to add warmth without announcing itself. The cake was light and tender, with subtle chocolate flavor that let the cream cheese frosting shine. That frosting was made with real cream cheese, butter, and powdered sugar, beaten until fluffy. Some families added pecans, others kept it smooth, but everyone agreed that cream cheese frosting from a can was an insult. The 3-layer cake was assembled with generous frosting between each layer, then covered completely until no red showed. It was refrigerated overnight so the flavors could marry and the cake could firm up. The cinnamon addition stayed secret because it was subtle but essential, creating complexity that made people wonder what made this red velvet different from all others. Turkey necks and rice gravy made sure no part of the bird went to waste. Once the holiday turkey had been carved, the necks were simmered down with onions, celery, and a touch of flour until the broth thickened into a dark, flavorful gravy. Poured over rice, it became a meal in itself, simple, filling, and rich with comfort. The meat from the necks was tender, sliding off the bone like butter, and the gravy carried every bit of the bird's essence. In many homes, this dish was the quiet favorite, eaten the day after the feast, when the celebration slowed but the warmth remained. It was food for resting hearts and tired hands, the kind that made you close your eyes after a long meal. Turkey necks and rice gravy turned leftovers into love, teaching that nothing was ever too small to be savored. Oyster dressing was the Christmas tradition for families who lived near water, combining cornbread dressing with briny oysters. Black mothers made cornbread specifically for this, letting it stale overnight before crumbling. The oysters were fresh, shucked that morning, their liquor saved for adding to the dressing. The cornbread was mixed with sautéed celery, onions, bell peppers, and herbs, then moistened with chicken broth and the oyster liquor. The whole oysters were folded in gently so they stayed intact during baking. The secret was adding hot sauce and Worcestershire sauce that enhanced the oysters' brininess without overwhelming them. The dressing baked until golden on top but stayed moist inside, the oysters plump and tender. This dish divided families. Some loved the combination, others couldn't get past the texture. But for oyster dressing families, Christmas wasn't complete without it. The hot sauce and Worcestershire addition stayed secret because balance was everything with oysters. Sweet potato bites topped with mini marshmallows were dessert-like appetizers that blurred the line between side dish and treat, their orange flesh and white topping creating visual appeal that drew children like magnets before dinner was served. Mothers would bake sweet potatoes until soft, then scoop out the flesh and mash it with butter, brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla extract until smooth and creamy. The sweetened sweet potato mixture was spooned into mini muffin tins or shaped into small balls and placed on baking sheets, each one topped with a single mini marshmallow that would toast golden brown. As they baked, the marshmallows puffed up and turned golden, creating that characteristic toasted flavor that children associated with campfires and summer fun. In the 1970s Black households, these bites represented creativity, taking traditional candied yams and reimagining them as finger foods children could grab.
Fried sweet potato pies were portable treasures that turned holiday flavors into handheld treats perfect for church socials. Cooks prepared spiced sweet potato filling, tucked it inside rounds of homemade dough, then sealed the edges before lowering them into hot oil. The crust fried golden and flaky while filling stayed warm and creamy, creating packages of comfort eaten without plates or forks. These hand pies appeared at revivals, picnics, and homecomings where food needed to travel well. The filling used beloved spices, including cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla that perfumed the air. Children loved these because they could eat while playing without returning to the table. Fried sweet potato pies was celebration food made practical, bringing holiday warmth to everyday occasions.
Fried okra rounds served with ranch dressing were crispy, crunchy appetizers that introduced children to vegetables in ways that made them forget they were eating something healthy, the golden coating making every bite feel like a treat. Mothers would slice fresh okra into thick rounds, coating them first in buttermilk that helped breading adhere, then dredging them in seasoned cornmeal mixed with flour, salt, pepper, and garlic powder. The okra rounds were dropped into hot oil where they bubbled and crisped, the cornmeal coating turning golden brown while the okra inside stayed tender. Once drained on paper towels and sprinkled with extra salt while still hot, the okra was piled into serving bowls and placed near small dishes of ranch dressing that children dunked them into with enthusiasm. In Black households during the 1970s, fried okra represented Southern tradition meeting holiday hospitality. Children loved fried okra because it felt like eating fried chicken in vegetable form. Rum raisin bread pudding used up leftover bread while tasting more luxurious than fresh-baked cake. Black mothers soaked raisins in dark rum for 3 days before Christmas, letting them plump and absorb alcohol. Stale bread, white bread, Hawaiian rolls, leftover cornbread was cubed and dried overnight. The custard combined eggs, heavy cream, whole milk, vanilla, cinnamon, and nutmeg, with extra yolks for richness. The secret was condensed milk, which added sweetness and created texture that wasn't quite custard, wasn't quite cake. The bread soaked in custard for an hour, absorbing every drop, then was folded with rum-soaked raisins and dotted with butter. It baked low and slow until the top crisped while the inside stayed creamy. The finishing touch was rum butter sauce. Butter, brown sugar, cream, and more rum, poured over warm servings. This appeared only at Christmas because the rum expense and 3-day preparation meant it was saved for the year's most important meal. Cane syrup popcorn balls were Christmas joy shaped by hand, sweet and sticky in a world where candy was rare and store-bought treats were out of reach. They began with plain popcorn, popped over a hot stove in iron pots that rattled and hissed as kernels burst to life. Each bowl of white puffed corn waited for its golden crown. Warm cane syrup poured in slow ribbons, coating every piece until the air smelled of caramel and smoke. Hands greased with butter worked quickly, pressing the sticky mix into balls before it cooled. It was messy work, but the kind that filled the kitchen with laughter and chatter. When the candy hardened, it shone like amber and cracked gently between teeth, sweet enough to make a child's eyes light up. These popcorn balls were handed out after church programs or shared at home on Christmas Eve, small tokens of community and care. They weren't bought from stores. They were made with love, time, and just enough syrup to bind everyone together. Candied yams with pineapple and pecans were the Christmas side dish that children actually asked for seconds of. Black mothers baked yams until tender, then peeled and sliced them thick, arranging them in buttered baking dishes. The syrup wasn't just butter and sugar, but included crushed pineapple with its juice, brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and the secret addition of orange juice and zest that brightened the sweetness. Pecan halves were pressed into the top, creating a gorgeous presentation. The dish baked until the syrup thickened and caramelized, the pecans toasted, and the yams absorbed all those flavors. Some families added marshmallows for the last few minutes, but traditionalists kept it pure. The pineapple added moisture, while the orange juice kept them from being cloying. This dish appeared on every Christmas table, its sweet richness balancing savory meats. The orange juice addition stayed secret because it was the key to perfectly balanced sweetness. Butter beans cooked with ham hock and served in small cups became hearty appetizers that filled hungry children before dinner, their creamy texture and smoky flavor creating comfort in every spoonful. Grandmothers would simmer dried butter beans with ham hocks, onions, and seasonings for hours until the beans became tender and creamy while absorbing the smoky, salty flavor from the meat. The finished beans were served in small portions in cups or bowls with small spoons, allowing guests to enjoy them without needing plates. Some families topped the beans with crumbled cornbread or a drizzle of hot sauce for extra flavor and texture. In Black households during the 1970s, butter beans represented soul food tradition brought to the appetizer table, showing that holiday food could honor heritage while fitting modern entertaining formats. Children loved butter beans because they tasted familiar and comforting, like Thanksgiving dinner in miniature form that warmed them from the inside.
Fried sweet potato rounds were simple treats that turned humble roots into crispy, caramelized coins of sweetness. Sweet potatoes were peeled and sliced into thick rounds, dredged lightly in flour mixed with cinnamon and sugar, then fried until edges caramelized and centers softened. The natural sugars intensified with heat, creating candy-like sweetness balanced by slight bitterness of browned edges. Families made these when sweet potato harvest filled root cellars with more than could be baked or mashed. The rounds were served as side dishes, snacks, or simple desserts when resources were limited. Children especially loved them, eating them like cookies while adults appreciated their practicality. Fried sweet potato rounds prove simple preparations create memorable flavors.
Shrimp cocktail served in small cups with tangy cocktail sauce was elegant finger food that made children feel sophisticated. The cold, tender shrimp dipped in spicy sweet sauce, creating flavors that seemed fancy. Mothers would boil shrimp in seasoned water with Old Bay seasoning, lemon, and bay leaves until they turned pink and curled, then plunge them into ice water to stop the cooking. Once chilled, the shrimp were peeled and deveined, their tails left on for easy handling, then arranged around small cups filled with cocktail sauce made from ketchup, horseradish, lemon juice, and Worcestershire sauce. The cocktail sauce had a sharp, tangy kick that balanced the shrimp's natural sweetness, creating combinations that felt restaurant quality. In the 1970s, Black households, shrimp cocktail represented luxury and celebration, an appetizer that elevated holiday gatherings. Children loved shrimp cocktail because they could hold the shrimp by the tail and dip them like French fries. Triple chocolate chess pie combined Southern tradition with chocolate decadence, creating a dessert so rich that small slices satisfied. Black mothers started with homemade pie crust made with lard, blind baked until golden. The filling was classic chess pie: eggs, sugar, butter, vinegar, and cornmeal, but transformed with 3 chocolates: cocoa powder whisked into sugar, melted bittersweet chocolate folded into eggs, and chocolate chips scattered across the crust. The secret was using buttermilk instead of regular milk, which reacted with chocolate to create brownie-like fudginess while maintaining chess pie's crisp top. Vanilla and espresso powder deepened the chocolate. The pie baked until the center barely wobbled, then cooled where it set into something between custard and fudge. The top crackled when pressed, giving way to dense chocolate richness. This appeared only at Christmas because chocolate was expensive. Mothers kept the triple chocolate technique and buttermilk secret. Turnip green Potlikker soup was the quiet strength of the table, a dish that came not from what was served first, but from what remained after. When the tender greens were eaten, the broth that simmered beneath them, the Potlikker, was saved like treasure. It was dark and smoky, heavy with the flavor of ham bones, onions, salt, and earth. Mixed with a bit of cornbread, rice, or stray vegetables, it became a nourishing soup that soothed hunger and offered comfort. In the old days, elders called it liquid gold, rich not in coins, but in care. It carried nutrients, yes, but also a promise that nothing made with love should ever go to waste. During the cold weeks after Christmas, families gathered around small bowls of Potlikker, sipping warmth that stretched far beyond its ingredients. Each spoonful was humility and hope combined, a quiet meal that spoke volumes about wisdom and endurance. Grease gravy rice was what people cooked when they refused to let anything go to waste. When breakfast meats were done frying, the leftover grease became treasure. A spoon of flour went in first, sizzling and popping until it turned golden. Then milk or water got poured in, slow and steady, until it thickened into smooth gravy. That hot gravy poured over white rice made something out of nearly nothing. It was salty, creamy, and smoky all at once. The smell filled the house, and the taste filled the stomach. Parents called it breakfast, but it could carry a family through an entire day. It came from kitchens that knew survival like a second language, where flavor was earned from thrift and patience. Kids grew up thinking it was comfort food, not knowing it was born from rationing and struggle. Grease gravy rice was more than a recipe. It was a declaration that no meal was too small to matter. Every bite was a promise that the family would eat, even when times were lean. It was humble food that carried pride on a spoon. Cream cheese and olive pinwheels, made with softened cream cheese mixed with chopped green olives and rolled in tortillas, created tangy, savory bites. children found intriguing. Aunties would soften cream cheese and mix it with finely chopped green olives, pimentos, and sometimes a touch of garlic powder, spreading the mixture evenly on flour tortillas. The tortillas were rolled tightly, wrapped in plastic, and refrigerated for hours to firm up before being sliced into colorful pinwheels. Each slice revealed swirls of white cream cheese dotted with green olive pieces, creating visual appeal that drew children's attention. In 1970s, Black households, these pinwheels represented creative entertaining, showing how simple ingredients could become elegant appetizers. Children loved them because they were fun to look at, easy to eat, and introduced them to olives in a creamy format that made the vegetables more approachable and less intimidating than eating them whole.
Fried fatback cracklings were crispy treasures rendered from pure pork fat that became snacks, seasonings, and survival food all in one. The fatback was cut into cubes and fried slowly until fat melted away and what remained turned into golden, crunchy morsels that shattered between teeth. The cracklings carried intense pork flavor, eaten straight from the pan or crumbled into cornbread for texture. Families made these during hog killing season when every part of the pig was processed for months ahead. Children gathered around waiting for the first batch, burning tongues on pieces still glistening with hot grease. The rendered lard was saved for cooking. Throughout the year, fried fatback cracklings represented the complete use of resources that defined soul food traditions.
Crab cakes formed into mini patties were seafood luxury that made Thanksgiving feel extra special. The sweet crab meat mixed with breadcrumbs and seasonings before being pan-fried until golden. Grandmothers would pick through cans of crab meat to remove any shell pieces, then gently fold the delicate meat with beaten eggs, breadcrumbs, mayonnaise, mustard, Old Bay seasoning, and sometimes diced bell peppers. The mixture was formed into small patties, each one handled carefully, then refrigerated briefly to help them hold together during cooking. The crab cakes were pan-fried in butter until golden brown on both sides, the exterior developing a crispy crust while the interior stayed moist and packed with sweet crab flavor. In the 1970s, Black households, crab cakes represented coastal sophistication, bringing seafood traditions to holiday tables and elevating the appetizer spread. Children loved mini crab cakes because they felt fancy, tasted sweet rather than fishy, and came in sizes perfect for young appetites. Black walnut pound cake was the Christmas treat that required foraging wild nuts in fall. Black mothers cracked black walnuts by hand, extracting the dark, intensely flavored meats that made English walnuts taste bland. The pound cake was traditional: butter, sugar, eggs, flour, but the black walnuts transformed it into something earthy and complex. The nuts were toasted lightly, then folded into the batter just before baking. The secret was using both butter and shortening in equal parts, which created pound cake that was tender but still had proper heft. A splash of bourbon enhanced the walnut's natural flavor. The cake baked in a tube pan until golden brown, filling the house with aroma that was impossible to resist. It cooled completely before being wrapped and stored, improving over several days as flavors deepened. Black walnuts stayed secret because finding and processing them required knowledge that not everyone had. Cracklin' cornbread was the sound and scent of Southern celebration, simple, hearty, and alive with flavor. The batter began with cornmeal, salt, and buttermilk, stirred smooth before being folded around handfuls of crispy pork cracklins, those golden bits left from rendering lard. When poured into a sizzling iron skillet, the mixture hissed and popped, the edges browning fast while the center baked tender and fragrant. The smell filled every corner of the house, smoke, salt, and sweetness in harmony. Pulled hot from the oven, it was sliced thick and served with cane syrup or honey, sometimes alongside collards or field peas. Every bite carried the crunch of the cracklins, the warmth of corn, and the satisfaction of something made from almost nothing. At Christmas, this cornbread became a feast in itself. Simple food transformed into comfort and pride. Crackling cornbread was more than a dish. It was tradition sizzling in a skillet, a golden link between the past and the present, proof that flavor could rise from thrift and care.
Fried okra fritters were clever ways to transform garden abundance into something crispy and irresistible during summer months. Cooks would slice fresh okra, mix it with cornmeal batter seasoned with onion and spices, then drop spoonfuls into hot oil until they puffed golden brown. The fritters emerged with crunchy exteriors, giving way to tender okra inside, the vegetable's natural slickness mellowed by frying. Families made these when gardens overflowed with okra, needing use before growing too tough. Church suppers featured platters passed around while still warm and fragrant. The dish was economical since okra grew easily in southern soil. Children who claimed to dislike okra devoured these fritters, proving preparation mattered as much as ingredients.
Stuffed celery with cream cheese and pimento created colorful boats that children picked up by their crunchy handles, the creamy filling contrasting perfectly with the crisp, fresh vegetable that provided texture amidst holiday indulgence. Mothers would wash and trim celery stalks, cutting them into 3-inch lengths before drying them thoroughly and arranging them on serving platters like little canoes. The filling was made by beating cream cheese until fluffy, then folding in diced pimentos, mayonnaise, and seasonings like garlic powder, onion powder, and black pepper. The cream cheese mixture was spread generously into each celery groove, mounded slightly and sometimes garnished with paprika, chopped olives, or crispy bacon. In Black households during the 1970s, stuffed celery represented an attempt to include something fresh among heavier holiday offerings. Children loved them because the cream cheese provided richness while celery added refreshing crunch. Great-grandmother's coconut cake was a 3-layer monument to coconut in every form. Black mothers baked white cake layers flavored with coconut milk, giving them moisture that lasted through New Year's. The frosting was genuine boiled icing, sugar, corn syrup, and egg whites beaten while hot syrup drizzled in, creating something between frosting and marshmallow. The secret was the coconut preparation. Fresh coconut was grated, then toasted until golden and fragrant, mixed with sweetened flaked coconut for texture. Between each layer went coconut cream filling, thick and custardy. The assembled cake was covered in boiled frosting, then pressed with handfuls of toasted coconut until no white showed. It was refrigerated overnight so flavors could meld, resulting in cake so moist it melted on your tongue. This recipe stayed secret because it required genuine skill and patience. Store-bought frosting wouldn't work, and rushing the boiled icing meant failure. Fried catfish nuggets brought the river straight to the table, their golden crust glistening like sunlight on water. When meat was too costly and game too scarce, fishing became salvation, and catfish was the prize. Early in the morning, men cast their lines from the banks or small wooden boats, bringing home enough to feed the whole family. The fish were cleaned by hand, each piece dipped in seasoned cornmeal and dropped into a cast-iron pot of hot oil that hissed and popped like music. The smell drifted for miles, warm, salty, and comforting. Once fried, the nuggets were crisp outside, tender within, eaten by the handful or dipped into spicy sauce. For Christmas dinners in riverside towns, this dish replaced turkey, yet no one felt they were missing a thing. It was fresh, familiar, and full of flavor born from work and gratitude. Served with coleslaw or cornbread, it turned even the simplest home into a feast. Fried catfish nuggets weren't just food. They were a symbol of ingenuity, the art of finding plenty in what the land and water offered freely. Every bite carried the taste of resilience and celebration.
Fried chicken livers were treasured delicacies in African-American kitchens during the 1960s and 70s, prized for their rich flavor and economical value. Cooks would rinse the livers, pat them dry, then dredge them in seasoned flour with paprika and cayenne before lowering them into hot oil. The exterior turned golden and crispy, while the inside stayed creamy, creating contrast that made every bite memorable. Families served them at gatherings, and packed them for workers heading to factories. The livers were affordable because butchers sold them cheaply or included them free with whole chickens. Served with hot sauce and white bread, fried chicken livers represented thrift and resourcefulness that defines soul food cooking.
Deviled eggs with paprika and pickle relish were the appetizer children fought over at every Thanksgiving gathering, their bright yellow centers dotted with red paprika creating tiny works of art. Grandmothers would boil dozens of eggs the night before, peeling them while warm and slicing lengthwise before scooping yolks into mixing bowls. The yolks were mashed with mayonnaise, yellow mustard, sweet pickle relish, and vinegar until perfectly creamy, then spooned back into egg white halves. Paprika sprinkled on top added color and smokiness. In Black households during the 1970s, deviled eggs symbolized celebration, appearing at every gathering from church dinners to reunions. Children would hover near the kitchen, waiting to sneak one before dinner, knowing that once adults arrived, these treats would disappear. The combination of creamy richness, tangy pickle brightness, and paprika's heat satisfied everyone. Hot wassail with spices was the Christmas drink that kept a pot simmering on the stove throughout the holidays. Black mothers made this with apple cider, orange juice, lemon juice, and the secret spice blend: whole cloves, cinnamon sticks, allspice berries, and star anise tied in cheesecloth. The mixture simmered for hours, filling the house with smell that announced Christmas more than any decoration could. The secret addition was cranberry juice and a splash of rum or brandy that added complexity without making it boozy. The wassail was served in mugs to guests who dropped by, to children coming in from playing in snow, to adults gathered around the tree. Each mug was garnished with an orange slice studded with cloves. The spice blend and cranberry addition stayed secret because these created depth that plain apple cider couldn't match. Mothers kept the pot going from Christmas Eve through New Year's Day. Hog maw and cabbage was the kind of meal that turned survival into something soulful. Made from the pig's stomach, cleaned and stuffed or stewed with greens, onions, and cabbage, it stretched humble ingredients into abundance. Every step took patience: washing, boiling, seasoning, but the result was rich and filling, flavored with the smokiness of salt meat and the sweetness of long cooking. It wasn't fancy, but it fed a crowd, especially during the Christmas season when families gathered in small homes with big appetites. The cabbage soaked up every bit of flavor, soft and savory, while the hog maw added a chew that reminded everyone of the work behind each bite. Dishes like this were born of necessity but shaped by love, created by hands that refused to let anything go to waste. Hog maw and cabbage wasn't just dinner. It was a celebration of endurance, thrift, and the beauty of making do.
Fried fish roe was a springtime tradition that brought excitement to African American tables when rivers ran full and fish were spawning. The roe sacks were carefully extracted, rinsed gently, and seasoned with salt and pepper before being dredged in cornmeal and lowered into sizzling lard. The coating turned crispy while the roe inside became firm yet slightly creamy, offering briny richness unlike anything else. Families near rivers considered this a seasonal treasure available only during spawning months. Children learned to appreciate its unique texture, watching elders prepare it with reverence passed through generations. Fried fish roe was often served alongside grits and eggs for breakfast, turning morning meals into something special.
Fish head stew was a dish born out of necessity, yet it carried surprising depth and flavor. Fish heads, often discarded by others, were simmered slowly with onions, potatoes, and rice until they yielded every ounce of richness to the broth. My grandmother insisted the heads made the stew better than fillies, providing body and nourishment that nothing else could. The bones and skin flavored the liquid until it turned hearty and comforting. Potatoes stretched the meal, rice thickened it, and vegetables added substance, turning scraps into a filling supper. The taste was strong, earthy, and unforgettable, reminding everyone that no part of food should go unused. For Black families in the 1960s, fish head stew was a common way to stretch the catch of the day, ensuring nothing went to waste. It became a lesson in thrift and gratitude, proof that survival demanded creativity. Fish head stew was both humble and mighty, sustaining families through lean times with flavor and tradition. Apple Brown Betty was a dessert that turned leftovers into legacy. Slices of tart apples were layered between crumbles of old bread, drizzled with molasses or sorghum syrup instead of refined sugar. As it baked, the bread soaked up the syrup and juice, becoming dark and caramelized around the edges. Served warm, it was crisp on top and soft beneath, a perfect balance of texture and taste. For many African American families, this was a Christmas treat. Simple, sweet, and deeply nostalgic. It carried the smell of hearth and home, of cinnamon and care. Apple Brown Betty proved that even the humblest ingredients could rise to something beautiful. It was a dessert that didn't just fill bellies, it filled hearts too, turning old bread and fruit into comfort. In its sticky sweetness lived the story of survival sweetened by love.
Fried chicken gizzards with gravy was Sunday dinner traditions, showcasing the soul food commitment to using every part of the bird. The gizzards were cleaned thoroughly, boiled until tender, then dredged in seasoned flour and fried until the coating turned deeply golden and crisp. Rich gravy was made from pan drippings, poured over rice or potatoes to soak up every drop. The texture was unique, chewy but not tough, with concentrated poultry flavor the rest of the chicken could not match. Families stretched one bird into multiple meals by frying gizzards separately as their own dish. Elders often claimed gizzards for themselves, considering them a reward for preparing Sunday dinner. Served with hot sauce, fried gizzards represented economy and appreciation for ingredients others discarded.
Rumaki-wrapped chicken livers and water chestnuts in bacon created sophisticated bites that curious children tried, the crispy bacon exterior making them willing to taste the unfamiliar liver that turned out mild. Aunties would cut chicken livers into bite-sized pieces, marinate them briefly in soy sauce and ginger, then wrap them with water chestnut slices in bacon before securing everything with toothpicks. The bundles were arranged on baking sheets and roasted until the bacon crisped and rendered, the fat keeping the liver moist while adding smoky saltiness that transformed the organ meat into something special. As they cooked, the soy sauce caramelized slightly, creating a sweet savory glaze that coated the bacon. In Black households during the 1970s, rumaki represented culinary adventurousness, recipes borrowed from magazines that brought international flavors to holiday tables. Children who were brave enough to try them discovered that bacon really did make everything better. Sugar cane sticks were the simplest kind of sweetness, and they carried a special memory for children who grew up with little. Fresh cane was cut into sticks, peeled and chewed for its sweet juice, offering a natural candy when refined sugar or store-bought treats were out of reach. For many children in the South, walking home with a stick of sugar cane was as good as holding a chocolate bar. It was affordable, long-lasting, and carried the earthy, raw sweetness of the land itself. Parents loved it because it kept children happy without costing much, and it taught the value of finding joy in small things. Sugar cane sticks carried the reminder that sweetness did not need to come from a store, but from fields worked by hand. They were part of the rhythm of rural life, tied to harvests and family memories. Even in the toughest years, sugar cane sticks brought happiness. Pig ear sandwiches were proof that nothing went to waste in a kitchen where every scrap had purpose. The ears were cleaned carefully, boiled for hours until tender, then fried to a golden crispness that crackled at the edges and chewed soft in the middle. Served on white bread with mustard or hot sauce, they carried a flavor deep as smoke and history itself. For many, it was the taste of home, born from necessity but remembered with pride. During Christmas gatherings, when the choicer cuts were long gone, pig ear sandwiches kept the celebration going late into the night. People gathered around the stove, swapping stories as grease popped and laughter rose. Each bite told a story of endurance, creativity, and gratitude for what the land and labor could provide. Pig ear sandwiches were not luxury food, they were legacy food, a reminder that dignity and flavor can thrive even in poverty's shadow.
Fried pork chop sandwiches were working-class treasures that fueled laborers through long days in factories and fields. Thin-cut pork chops were pounded flat, seasoned with salt, pepper, and garlic, then dredged in flour and fried until edges turned crispy while meat stayed juicy. Slapped between soft white bread with mustard and pickles, these sandwiches traveled well and satisfied hunger like few other meals. Families made them early mornings, wrapping them in wax paper for husbands heading to work before dawn. The pork chops were affordable cuts that stretched when fried thin and served between bread. Children received smaller versions as treats, learning good food required no expensive ingredients. These sandwiches represented honest labor and care families put into keeping workers fed.
Cheese straws made from sharp cheddar and cayenne pepper were crispy, addictive sticks that disappeared from serving bowls almost as quickly as they were refilled, their orange gold color and spicy kick making them irresistible. Grandmothers would grate blocks of sharp cheddar by hand, mixing it with softened butter, flour, cayenne pepper, and salt until the dough came together, then pressing it through cookie presses or rolling it into long ropes before slicing. The cheese straws baked until crispy and slightly browned at the edges, filling kitchens with the sharp, tangy aroma of melting cheese mixed with subtle heat. Once cooled, they were stored in tins, maintaining crispness for days. In 1970s, Black households, cheese straws represented Southern tradition, recipes passed down through generations with each family adding their signature touch, extra cayenne, paprika, or pecans. Lemon chess pie with whipped cream was the Christmas dessert that balanced all the heavy, rich foods with bright acidity. Black mothers made this with homemade crust, blind-baked to prevent sogginess. The filling combined eggs, sugar, butter, cornmeal, and fresh lemon juice and zest, lots of both for intense citrus flavor. The secret was adding a tablespoon of white vinegar along with the lemon juice, which created tang that made your mouth water. The pie baked until the center was just set, the top golden and slightly crackled. It cooled to room temperature where it firmed into creamy, custardy filling that sliced clean. The whipped cream wasn't sweetened but left plain, so its richness balanced the pie's intense tartness. Some families added a splash of vanilla to the cream, but most kept it pure. This pie appeared at Christmas because lemons were expensive and using so many was a luxury. The vinegar addition stayed secret because most people assumed all the tang came from lemons alone. Molasses candied yams were sweetened by patience, not plenty. When refined sugar was too dear, families reached for homemade molasses or sorghum syrup to coat slices of sweet potato until they glistened like amber. The yams simmered slow in cast iron skillets, bubbling under a glaze that filled the kitchen with a smell deep as memory. They were tender, caramelized at the edges, and sticky enough to make every bite feel like dessert and blessing at once. Molasses brought something that sugar never could, a smoky sweetness that felt ancient, earthy, and whole. These yams were served alongside meat if there was any, or eaten plain from a spoon when there wasn't. They were comfort, made from soil and struggle alike, proof that sweetness could be drawn from even the hardest ground. In every spoonful was history cooked down to syrup and flame.
Fried cornmeal mush was thrift-made delicious. Fried salt pork strips were flavor bombs that brought richness to simple meals when money was tight and options were few. The salt pork was sliced thin, soaked briefly to remove excess salt, then fried slowly until fat rendered out and edges turned crispy like thick-cut bacon. What remained was intensely savory, chewy in the middle with shattering crisp edges, adding texture to plates of beans, greens, or eggs. Families relied on salt pork because it kept without refrigeration, stored in crocks for months. The rendered fat was saved for cooking everything from biscuits to vegetables, stretching resources further. Workers packed fried salt pork in lunches, eating them cold on bread at job sites. This was survival food that tasted better than necessity demanded.
Bacon-wrapped water chestnuts delivered crispy, salty, and slightly sweet bites that children fought over despite not knowing exactly what water chestnuts were, the bacon exterior and crunchy interior creating mysterious but delicious combinations. Aunties would drain cans of whole water chestnuts, wrapping each one with half a strip of bacon and securing it with toothpicks before arranging them on baking sheets. Before baking, each bundle was brushed with a mixture of brown sugar and soy sauce that caramelized during cooking, creating a sweet salty glaze that coated the bacon. The water chestnuts roasted until the bacon was crispy and rendered, the fat dripping away while the sugar coating turned golden brown and slightly sticky. In Black households during the 1970s, bacon-wrapped water chestnuts represented sophistication borrowed from magazines, recipes that seemed fancy but remained simple for home cooks. Children loved them because bacon made everything better. Secret Spice eggnog was the Christmas drink that guests begged to replicate but never could. Black mothers made it from scratch with raw eggs, whole milk, heavy cream, and sugar, but the magic lived in the spice blend. Nutmeg was obvious, cinnamon expected, but the secret additions, cardamom, mace, allspice, sometimes clove, created complexity. Store-bought versions couldn't touch. The mixture was cooked gently until it thickened into custard, then chilled overnight. Some families added dark rum or bourbon, others kept it virgin but added vanilla bean and almond extract for richness. The eggnog was served in crystal punch bowls at Christmas Eve gatherings, thick enough to coat a spoon. Children got small cups, adults got generous pours, and everyone tried to guess the secret ingredients. Mothers would smile when guests guessed cinnamon, but the real combinations stayed hidden, passed down only through whispered kitchen conversations when daughters were trusted with family secrets. Buttermilk cornbread pudding was the sweet ending to a long day's work, born from the habit of never wasting a crumb. Leftover cornbread was crumbled into a pan, soaked in buttermilk, sugar, and a few eggs, then baked until golden and bubbling at the edges. The result was soft and custardy, rich with tang and sweetness. Families who had little turned this into something extraordinary, a dessert that cost almost nothing but tasted like a celebration. Served warm with a drizzle of syrup or a spoon of butter, it filled the room with quiet joy. The flavor was simple, but the feeling was grand. Buttermilk cornbread pudding showed that the same bread that fed you through hard times could also bring comfort when the world finally slowed down. It was thrift turned into tenderness, poverty turned into pride, and warmth turned into sweetness.
Fried apple fritters were sweet indulgences that turned seasonal fruit into golden rings of comfort during autumn harvest months. Cooks sliced apples into rounds, dipped them in sweetened batter spiced with cinnamon and nutmeg, then fried until coating puffed and turned deep golden while fruit inside softened. The fritters were dusted with powdered sugar while warm, creating a snowy coating that melted against the hot surface. Families made these when apple trees produced more fruit than could be eaten fresh, turning abundance into celebration. Children gathered around skillets waiting for the first batch, burning fingers in eagerness. Church bake sales featured platters wrapped in wax paper, sold for pennies supporting community causes. Fried apple fritters were autumn in every bite.
Peanut brittle from roasted peanuts was a candy of patience, timing, and steady hands. It began with the scent of nuts roasting in the oven, their skins crackling and releasing a warm, earthy aroma that filled the house. Meanwhile, sugar syrup simmered on the stove, bubbling to just the right amber hue that signaled it was ready. Too soon, and the candy would never harden. Too late, and it would turn bitter and blackened. Into that fragile in-between moment went the peanuts, stirred until everyone glistened under its thin coat of syrup. The mixture was poured out onto greased pans, spread thin, and left to cool. As it hardened, it crackled and popped, breaking apart into glassy golden pieces that shone in the light. The taste was sharp, sweet, and nutty all at once. Simple ingredients transformed into something almost magical. At Christmas, bags of brittle were passed from hand to hand, wrapped in paper or cloth, each one a little gift made of patience and fire. Making it was as much about the process as the candy itself, a ritual of watching, stirring, and waiting that bound generations together. Every shard of peanut brittle carried the memory of laughter, the echo of wooden spoons against iron pots, and the sweetness that could only come from endurance.
Fried croaker fish were beloved staples at fish fries throughout African American communities along rivers and coastlines. Named for the sound they made when caught, these fish were cleaned, scored, seasoned, then dredged in cornmeal before hitting hot oil. The skin fried into a crackling crust while white flesh inside stayed flaky and moist, falling easily from the bone. Families gathered at community fish fries where croakers sizzled in large outdoor fryers, the smell drawing neighbors from blocks away. The fish were served on newspaper with hot sauce, white bread, and coleslaw. Children learned to eat around bones carefully, developing skills that served them at many future fish fries. Fried croaker represented community gathering and celebration.
Fried chicken wings with hot sauce and butter created sticky, finger-licking appetizers that had children lined up before dinner was announced, their crispy exteriors giving way to tender meat falling off the bone. Families prepared massive batches on Thanksgiving morning, seasoning them with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika, before dredging in flour and dropping into cast-iron skillets filled with bubbling hot oil. The wings fried until golden brown and crackling crisp, filling kitchens with aromas that drew everyone from every corner. Once drained and still hot, wings were tossed in melted butter and hot sauce, the heat always bold and spicy. In the 1970s, Black households, these wings represented abundance, showing guests everyone was welcome to eat their fill. Children loved them because they were handheld, required no utensils, and delivered maximum flavor with every bite. Molasses ginger snap cookies were the Christmas cookies that actually snapped when broken, spicy, and crisp, and perfect for dunking in coffee. Black mothers made these weeks before Christmas, storing them in tins where they stayed fresh through New Year's. The dough started with molasses, dark, not light, which gave the cookies deep flavor and dark color. Fresh ginger was grated into the dough along with ground ginger, creating layers of heat. The secret was black pepper and cayenne, just pinches that added complexity without obvious spiciness. The dough was chilled overnight, then rolled into balls, rolled in coarse sugar, and baked until the edges set. As they cooled, the centers firmed into the perfect snap. These weren't soft, chewy cookies, but proper ginger snaps that crackled. They were packed into tins with parchment between layers, given as gifts to neighbors and teachers. The pepper and cayenne edition stayed secret because most people couldn't identify what made these snaps more interesting. Fried fatback with gravy was the breakfast that started Christmas morning with sizzle and salt. Thin strips of cured pork belly were fried until crisp, their edges curling in the hot skillet. The drippings were saved, always saved, and whisked with flour and milk to make a rich, creamy gravy poured over biscuits or rice. It was the taste of indulgence in a world that rarely offered much of it. The crackle of the fatback and the smell of the gravy meant that Christmas had truly begun. Children gathered close, watching the pan and waiting for their turn, while grown folks shared stories of the year gone by. Fatback might have been scraps to some, but to those who knew its worth, it was a feast in itself. Every crisp bite and creamy spoonful told a story of pride, patience, and Southern ingenuity.
Fried porgies were coastal treasures that brought the taste of the Atlantic to African American tables throughout the Southeast. These small, bony fish were cleaned whole, scored along the sides, seasoned generously, then dredged in cornmeal and fried until skin turned crispy while flesh stayed moist and sweet. Eating them required skill, picking around tiny bones, but those who grew up with porgies considered the effort worthwhile. Families near the coast caught them fresh, while inland communities bought from vendors traveling through neighborhoods. Fried porgies were Friday night suppers, fish fry centerpieces, and weeknight meals when budgets were tight. The entire fish was edible for those willing to crunch through crispy fins and tails.
Pickled shrimp marinated in vinegar, oil, and spices created tangy, flavorful bites that adventurous children tried. The cold, tender shrimp infused with herbs and aromatics that made them taste complex. Aunties would boil shrimp until just cooked, then peel them and place them in jars or bowls where they were covered with a marinade of vinegar, oil, sliced onions, bay leaves, peppercorns, and sometimes lemon slices. The shrimp marinated for at least 24 hours, absorbing the tangy, aromatic flavors and developing a pickled taste that was both refreshing and sophisticated. The marinated shrimp were served cold with toothpicks for easy serving, the onions and bay leaves removed or left in depending on family preference. In Black households during the 1970s, pickled shrimp represented make-ahead convenience, appetizers that actually improved with time. Children who tried pickled shrimp discovered seafood could be tangy and bright. Beef Wellington, adapted for Black families, was Christmas dinner centerpiece that proved fancy food could be made at home. Black mothers used the best beef tenderloin they could afford, searing it until crusty, then wrapping it in mushroom duxelles, pâté, and puff pastry. The secret was seasoning the mushrooms with Worcestershire sauce and hot sauce, which added umami and subtle heat that elevated the dish. The wrapped beef was brushed with egg wash and baked until the pastry was golden and the beef reached perfect medium rare. The secret additions stayed hidden because they represented adaptation, taking French cooking and making it speak to Black palates. This dish appeared at Christmas when families wanted to show sophistication. The preparation required skill and confidence that many women had, but rarely displayed. The Worcestershire and hot sauce additions stayed secret because they made the Wellington uniquely theirs. Field peas and rice, better known as Hoppin' John, was more than a meal. It was a wish cooked into being. On the surface, it was simple. Black-eyed peas simmered slowly with onions, a bit of salt pork or ham hock for flavor, and spooned generously over rice. But each ingredient carried meaning. The peas stood for coins, the rice for abundance, and if greens were added, they symbolized wealth and growth in the new year to come. Families believed that eating it on Christmas or New Year's Day would bring luck, but it was the taste, smoky, earthy, and deeply satisfying, that made it beloved. The scent of simmering peas filled the home long before the first bowl was served. It was cheap to make but rich in comfort, a dish that turned thrift into celebration. For those who had little, it offered the promise of more. For those who had plenty, it was a reminder of humility. Hoppin' John was food that bridged hope and hunger, linking every year to the next with a spoonful of faith.
Fried hog maws were testament to the soul food philosophy that nothing from the pig should go to waste. The pig's stomach was cleaned meticulously, boiled until tender, then sliced into strips and fried until edges turned crispy while the center stayed chewy. The flavor was mild and porky, taking on whatever seasonings the cook chose to add. Families who grew up eating hog maws considered them comfort food, while those unfamiliar often needed convincing. The dish appeared at holiday tables and community gatherings where traditional foods were celebrated. Elders passed down preparation techniques, teaching younger generations the patience required to clean and cook them properly. Fried hog maws carried cultural significance beyond their flavor.
Ham biscuits made with country ham and soft dinner rolls became handheld sandwiches that children devoured, the salty ham contrasting perfectly with the sweet, buttery rolls that held everything together. Mothers would slice country ham paper thin, the intensely salty, cured meat packed with flavor that needed only small amounts to satisfy. Then tuck the slices into soft dinner rolls that had been split and buttered. Some families brushed the tops of the assembled biscuits with melted butter and baked them briefly to warm everything through and create slightly crispy tops. The combination of salty, savory ham with soft, slightly sweet rolls created perfect flavor balance that kept people coming back for more. In 1970s Black households, ham biscuits represented Southern tradition, appetizers that could be prepared ahead and served at room temperature. Children loved ham biscuits because they were familiar comfort food in easy-to-eat form, requiring no plates or utensils and perfect for grabbing. Praline sweet potato casserole elevated humble yams into something so decadent that guests forgot it was technically a side dish. Black mothers roasted sweet potatoes whole until their sugars caramelized, never boiling them because that made them watery. The roasted flesh was mashed with butter, brown sugar, eggs, vanilla, and the secret ingredient, bourbon that enhanced without announcing itself. The mixture went into a buttered dish, but the glory lived in the topping. Pecans chopped fine and coarse, combined with brown sugar, flour, melted butter, and cayenne that made the sweetness interesting. Some families added crushed cornflakes for crunch. The casserole baked until the topping bubbled and crisped, creating a shell that had to be cracked with a serving spoon. This wasn't the marshmallow-topped version white families made. This was sophisticated and complex. Mothers guarded the bourbon and cayenne secret because those touches separated their casserole from everyone else's. Molasses stack cake was the Christmas centerpiece that grew layer by layer, built not from luxury, but from love and labor. Each thin, golden brown cake was baked separately, its surface brushed with warm molasses or sorghum syrup before another layer was carefully added on top. When finished, it stood tall and proud, heavy with sweetness and meaning. Then came the hardest part, waiting. For several days, the cake sat wrapped and resting, the syrup slowly soaking into every layer until the texture turned moist and tender, the flavors deepened, and time itself became an ingredient.
Fried corn fritters were summer celebrations that captured the sweetness of fresh-picked corn in crispy golden packages. Cooks scraped kernels from cobs, mixed them with flour, eggs, and seasonings, then dropped spoonfuls into hot oil where they puffed and browned. The fritters were sweet and savory, tender inside with crispy edges, providing textural contrast. Families made these when corn season peaked and ears were so abundant that new uses became necessary. Church picnics featured platters served warm with butter or honey drizzled on top. Children loved them because they tasted almost like dessert while being acceptable as a side dish. Fried corn fritters were summer preserved in every bite, a taste that lingered in memory long after harvest ended.
Cocktail meatballs simmered in grape jelly and chili sauce created sweet, savory bites that children couldn't resist, the glossy sauce coating each meatball like candy while delivering unexpected flavors. Mothers would brown frozen meatballs in skillets before transferring them to slow cookers or pots where they simmered in a mixture of grape jelly and bottled chili sauce that melted together into a thick, shiny glaze. The combination sounded strange but tasted magical, the grape jelly's sweetness balancing the chili sauce's tang and creating a flavor profile that kept people reaching for more. As the meatballs simmered, they absorbed the sauce and became tender, the exterior developing a sticky coating that made them perfect for spearing with toothpicks. In Black households during the 1970s, these cocktail meatballs represented easy elegance, a recipe that seemed fancy but required minimal effort. Children loved them because they were bite-sized, required no cutting, and tasted like a sweet, savory treat. Brown sugar bourbon ham glaze transformed the Christmas ham from ordinary to legendary, creating a mahogany crust that crackled when carved. Black mothers started with dark brown sugar, maple syrup, and Dijon mustard, but the secret was good bourbon, smooth stuff that added depth without harshness. The glaze was simmered with butter, apple cider vinegar, and blackstrap molasses that gave it caramel complexity. Some families added crushed pineapple, others used orange zest, but every family had their specific ratio. The ham was scored in diamonds, studded with cloves, then basted every 20 minutes, each application building layers of flavor. The glaze pooled at the bottom, mixing with drippings to create sauce so good people sopped it with rolls. This recipe was guarded because it made every other ham taste ordinary. Daughters-in-law asked for it, neighbors hinted, but the measurements stayed in mother's head until she decided you'd earned the right to carry it forward. Sweet potato tea cakes were the taste of Christmas love, hand-shaped and baked with care when pie fixings were too dear. Mashed sweet potatoes took the place of expensive butter, giving each cake a soft golden hue and a sweetness all its own. The dough was mixed in big wooden bowls, rolled out on floured tables, and cut into circles by jar lids or tin cups. When they came out of the oven, the air turned rich with spice and sugar. These little cakes were passed around in napkins at church socials or packed for neighbors as gifts. Each one told a story of resourceful joy, how something so simple could still feel special. Children waited by the stove for the first warm bite, soft and fragrant in their hands. Sweet potato tea cakes were humble and heavenly, proof that love could rise even without plenty.
Fried peach ham pies were summer treasures that turned ripe fruit into portable packages of golden flaky comfort. Fresh peaches were peeled, sliced, and cooked down with sugar and spices until they became thick, filling, tucked inside rounds of homemade dough. The pies were sealed carefully, then lowered into hot oil where crust fried crispy while filling bubbled inside. Families made these during peach season when trees produced more fruit than could be eaten fresh. The pies traveled well to church gatherings and work sites where handheld treats provided midday comfort. Children often helped with crimping edges, learning kitchen skills through participation. Glazed with sugar while warm, fried peach ham pies carried Southern summers in every bite. Fried chitterlings were the bold expressions of soul food tradition, transforming pig intestines into something crispy and surprisingly delicious.
7-layer caramel cake was the crown jewel that appeared only at Christmas, taking 2 full days to complete. Black mothers baked 7 thin yellow layers that had to be perfectly even, then made caramel frosting from scratch by cooking sugar until amber, adding cream at precisely the right moment. The frosting required constant stirring and a candy thermometer, with temperatures mattering more than oven settings. Each layer was brushed with vanilla syrup, then stacked with warm caramel between, assembled while the frosting was still workable. The finished cake stood 8 inches tall with a glossy shell that cracked beautifully when sliced. Grandmothers made this cake, aunties made this cake, but the recipe stayed locked in memory, never written down. It was shared only with daughters who'd proven themselves patient enough to stand at the stove for hours. The cake represented legacy, the kind of food that announced a woman's mastery and her commitment to making Christmas extraordinary. Macaroni salad with diced vegetables served in small cups was creamy comfort food that children recognized and loved. The familiar pasta combined with mayonnaise, pickles, and vegetables, creating flavors that felt like home. Mothers would cook elbow macaroni until tender, drain it, and rinse with cold water before mixing it with mayonnaise, diced celery, chopped pickles, diced bell peppers, hard-boiled eggs, and seasonings. The salad was chilled for several hours, then served in small portions with spoons. Some families added mustard for tang, others included diced pimentos for color, each version reflecting family preferences. In the 1970s Black households, macaroni salad represented familiar comfort brought to the appetizer table, showing that holiday food didn't always need to be fancy. Children loved macaroni salad because it tasted familiar and satisfying, like picnic food that reminded them of summer even during cold November. Bread pudding with cane syrup was the dessert that proved nothing, not even stale bread, was ever truly lost. Pieces of leftover loaves were soaked in warm milk, beaten eggs, and a heavy drizzle of homemade cane syrup until they softened into something new. The mixture baked slowly, filling the room with a smell deep and sweet enough to make mouths water long before it was ready. Once out of the oven, it was sticky, tender, and golden on top, like sunshine trapped in sugar. For families who could not afford store-bought sweets, this was luxury in a pan. The cane syrup gave it a depth that regular sugar never could, a taste of smoke, soil, and patience. Every bite carried the memory of hands stirring, saving, and savoring. Bread pudding with cane syrup was warmth made edible, a Christmas comfort born straight out of resourcefulness and love. Blackstrap molasses cookies were the dark heart of Christmas baking, chewy, spicy, and rich with history that stretched across generations. The thick, bittersweet molasses gave them not only color and depth, but also a sense of place, a reminder of fields and mills where the syrup first began. Into that dark richness went cinnamon, cloves, and ginger, each spice a whisper of warmth and memory. The dough, heavy in the bowl, stuck to wooden spoons and flour-dusted fingers, shaped by hands that worked hard but still found time to create something sweet. When baked, the cookies filled every room with the scent of sugar-meeting smoke, a smell that clung to curtains and hearts alike. They were soft inside, sturdy outside, meant to last through the holidays or be packed into tins for neighbors and friends. Children would sneak them warm from the pan, their faces sticky with molasses and smiles. Every batch told a story of endurance, the kind of sweetness carved out of scarcity. In their darkness was comfort, in their simplicity, pride. These cookies were more than dessert. They were memory baked into spice and patience, carrying with them the unspoken truth that love always finds a way to rise, even in lean times. Black walnut pound cake carried the wild woods straight into the holiday kitchen with a perfume unlike any other. Foragers collected the hard-shelled nuts each autumn, cracking them carefully to release the dark, robust kernels inside. The cake batter, rich with butter and eggs, absorbed the strong, earthy flavor of the walnuts, baking into a loaf dense enough to slice thin and savor slowly. Served at Christmas or family reunions, the cake announced both celebration and the success of gathering nature's bounty. Children helped shell the nuts, their hands stained brown from the husks, a seasonal badge of honor. Neighbors traded slices wrapped in wax paper as gifts, spreading cheer through the community. Today, imported walnuts and commercial cakes have replaced the ritual, but the memory of that deep, almost smoky taste lingers for those who once enjoyed a slice with coffee while snow fell outside and the house smelled of spice and toasting nuts. Sausage balls made with breakfast sausage, cheese, and biscuit mix, baked into savory spheres that children popped into their mouths like candy, their crispy exteriors giving way to soft, cheesy, slightly spicy interiors. Mothers would combine raw breakfast sausage with shredded sharp cheddar cheese and dry biscuit mix, kneading everything together until well combined. The mixture was then rolled into balls about an inch in diameter, arranged on baking sheets with space between them, and baked until golden brown. As they baked, the fat from the sausage rendered while the cheese melted, creating savory, flavorful bites that were crispy outside and tender inside. In the 1970s, Black households, sausage balls represented easy entertaining, a recipe that could be made ahead. Children loved sausage balls because they were perfectly portioned, required no utensils, and delivered breakfast flavors in snackable form.
Fried chicken wings were pieces left after drumsticks, and thighs claimed center stage, transformed into crispy treasures through careful seasoning and hot oil. The wings were separated at joints, seasoned with salt, pepper, garlic, and paprika, dredged in flour, then fried until skin turned impossibly crispy while meat stayed juicy. The flavor was concentrated poultry richness, the skin providing satisfying crunch with every bite. Families who bought whole chickens saved wings for weeknight meals, stretching one bird across multiple days. Children loved wings because they were perfect handheld sizes, eaten standing up or packed in lunch bags. The bones were sucked clean, every bit of flavor extracted before discarding. Fried wings were practical, delicious, and represented nothing wasted.
Pimento cheese pinwheels made with tortillas spread with creamy pimento cheese and rolled into tight spirals created colorful, easy-to-eat bites that children grabbed enthusiastically. Aunties would spread flour tortillas with homemade pimento cheese made from sharp cheddar, cream cheese, diced pimentos, mayonnaise, and seasonings. The tortillas were then rolled tightly into logs, wrapped in plastic wrap, and refrigerated for several hours to firm up and make slicing easier. Once chilled, the logs were unwrapped and sliced into rounds about half an inch thick, each pinwheel revealing the bright orange cheese dotted with red pimento pieces. In 1970s, Black households' pimento cheese pinwheels represented modern entertaining, a variation on traditional pimento cheese that made serving easier and more elegant. Children loved pimento cheese pinwheels because they were perfectly portioned, colorful, and tasted like their favorite spread in a fun new format. Honey-glazed cornbread dressing was the side dish guests returned for thirds of, completely different from dry sage-heavy stuffing. Black mothers made their own cornbread in cast iron until dark and crusty, then crumbled it and left it out overnight. The cornbread was mixed with sautéed celery, onions, and the secret trinity, bell peppers that added sweetness and color. The liquid wasn't just broth, but turkey drippings, chicken stock, and the secret addition: honey stirred into melted butter. Eggs bound it together, sage and thyme added savory depth, but the honey created complexity. Some families added chopped pecans, others stirred in crumbled sausage, but the honey butter mixture was universal. The dressing was spread in deep pans, dotted with butter, and baked until the top crisped while the inside stayed moist. The honey caramelized slightly, creating sweet spots that contrasted with savory richness. Mothers guarded the honey technique because it separated good from unforgettable dressing. Cornbread dressing with giblets was the kind of dish that turned thrift into tradition. It started with the scraps, crumbled cornbread left from the week, mixed with chopped chicken livers, onions, and herbs pulled straight from backyard gardens. The scent of sage and broth filled the home long before the meal was ready, carrying the warmth of something earned, not bought. The giblets, boiled down to tender perfection, gave the dish a richness that spoke of making the most from what little there was. On Christmas Day, this was often the centerpiece, not because it was grand, but because it was shared. Families gathered around small tables and large pots, finding joy in the familiar taste of something humble. Cornbread dressing was not about luxury. It was about love stretched wide enough to feed everyone. Every bite carried memory, patience, and pride, the real flavor of the season.
Fried green tomatoes were clever solutions when frost threatened gardens before everything could ripen. The firm, tart tomatoes were sliced thick, dipped in buttermilk, dredged in cornmeal, then fried until coating turned golden and crisp. The tomato inside softened slightly while retaining its tangy bite, creating flavor unlike anything ripe tomatoes offered. Families served them as side dishes, appetizers, or layered in sandwiches where their tartness cut through richer flavors. The dish appeared at Sunday dinners and weeknight suppers alike, equally at home on formal tables and kitchen counters. Children who grew up eating fried green tomatoes often preferred them to ripe versions, craving that crispy coating and tangy center. This was resourcefulness transformed into tradition.
Wild plum jam tartlets were little treasures made from what the land gave freely, turning foraged fruit into sweetness that carried through the seasons. When wild plums ripened in the heat of summer, families gathered them from the edges of fields and fence rows, their tart skins staining fingers deep red. Those plums were boiled down with sugar and patience, stirred until they thickened into a glossy jam that caught the sunlight like stained glass. Stored in jars through the long months, that jam became a promise of warmth when winter arrived. By Christmas, scraps of pie dough or leftover biscuit dough were rolled thin and filled with a spoonful of that plum preserve, then folded and baked until the air filled with the scent of fruit and flour mingled together. They came out bubbling, their centers jeweled and edges browned, each one small enough to vanish in 2 bites, but rich enough to linger in memory. Shared during church gatherings or family dinners, they were a reminder that sweetness didn't come from wealth. It came from will, from time, from knowing how to make something precious out of what was freely given. Wild plum tartlets weren't just dessert. They were evidence that nature and nurture could meet in a single bite. Collard greens with smoked turkey and hot pepper vinegar were Christmas dinner tradition that proved vegetables could be the star of the plate. Black mothers started preparation Christmas Eve, washing greens leaf by leaf to remove every speck of grit. The greens were cooked low and slow with smoked turkey necks or wings, onions, garlic, and the secret addition, a ham hock for extra richness. The pot simmered for hours until the greens turned dark and tender, the broth becoming potlikker so flavorful it could be sipped alone. The finishing touch was hot pepper vinegar, white vinegar infused with hot peppers for weeks, splashed over the greens just before serving. The vinegar brightened the rich greens and added heat that cut through their earthiness. These greens appeared on Christmas tables alongside ham and turkey, often eaten with cornbread to soak up the potlikker. The ham hock addition and the hot pepper vinegar technique stayed secret because these created depth and complexity that plain greens couldn't match. Rice cakes fried in lard were born from wisdom and waste-not cooking. Cold rice from yesterday's meal was mixed with cornmeal or flour, sometimes with an egg if one could be spared, and shaped into small, flat cakes. Dropped into bubbling lard, they sizzled until their edges turned crisp and golden while the centers stayed tender. The smell filled the house, simple, savory, satisfying. Served hot with a drizzle of syrup, molasses, or gravy, they turned meager leftovers into something to look forward to. On Christmas mornings, when the kitchen was alive with sound, these cakes came to the table beside scrambled eggs, salt pork, or even sweet preserves. They weren't extravagant, but they felt like a feast, a small miracle spun from thrift and care. Rice cakes fried in lard taught a quiet lesson, that love and resourcefulness could turn even a handful of cold rice into a meal worth remembering. Hoppin' John with collards was New Year's Eve tradition that started at Christmas dinner as a promise of good fortune. Black mothers cooked black-eyed peas with rice, smoked ham hocks, onions, and the secret addition of tomato paste that added depth without announcing itself. The peas simmered until tender, then rice was stirred in to absorb the flavorful broth. Collard greens were served alongside, their potlikker mixing with the Hoppin' John on the plate. The combination represented prosperity, peas for coins, greens for paper money. Some families added hot sauce, others preferred vinegar, but the tomato paste stayed universal. The dish was eaten at midnight on New Year's Eve, ensuring the coming year would bring financial blessing. Mothers made extra because leftovers were considered lucky to eat throughout January. The tomato paste addition stayed secret because it created umami that most people couldn't identify but definitely tasted. Homemade molasses taffy pulls were less about candy and more about connection. On Christmas night, when the chores were done and the fire glowed low, families gathered around iron pots bubbling with dark, fragrant molasses. The syrup was boiled to just the right stage, then poured onto buttered pans to cool until it could be handled. Everyone, from the youngest to the oldest, took a turn pulling the sticky taffy, stretching, twisting, and folding it until it turned from brown to golden, smooth and glossy. The sound of laughter mixed with the crackle of the fire, and the sweet smell filled the room. It was a game, a treat, and a ritual all in one. Fingers stuck together, faces glowed, and worries melted away for a while. When finished, the taffy was rolled into ropes or small candies, wrapped in wax paper, and saved for later or given to neighbors. Molasses taffy pulls were more than sweets. They were the taste of togetherness and joy made by hand.
Fried Spam slices were resourceful meals that turned canned meat into something crispy and satisfying when fresh options were limited. The Spam was sliced thick, then fried in a hot skillet until the exterior caramelized and developed crispy edges while the center stayed tender. The flavor was salty and slightly sweet from caramelization, transformed from canned softness into something with appealing texture. Families kept Spam in pantries because it required no refrigeration and lasted indefinitely. The fried slices were served with eggs for breakfast, tucked into sandwiches for lunch, or eaten alongside rice for dinner. Children often preferred fried Spam to fresh pork because of its familiar flavor. This was practical food that sustained communities through uncertain times.
Ambrosia salad with fresh coconut was the Christmas side dish that straddled dessert and salad. Black mothers made this using fresh fruit, mandarin oranges, pineapple chunks, maraschino cherries, and the secret addition of pomegranate seeds that added jewel-tone color and tart brightness. The binding agent wasn't just whipped cream, but a mixture of whipped cream, sour cream, and cream cheese that gave it tanginess. Fresh coconut was grated and toasted lightly, adding nutty depth that sweetened flaked coconut couldn't match. Mini marshmallows were folded in at the last minute so they stayed soft. The salad was refrigerated for several hours, letting flavors meld while the coconut softened. It was served in crystal bowls at Christmas dinner, looking almost too pretty to eat with pink and white and red colors. The pomegranate addition and the cream cheese mixture stayed secret because these elevated ambrosia from church potluck standard to something genuinely special. Which forgotten recipe deserves a comeback? Share the soul food dish you miss most in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more flavors history almost forgot.